The photograph radiated pure innocence. A young girl, maybe 7 years old, sat on weathered wooden steps, her arms wrapped around a shaggy dog nearly as large as herself. Both faced the camera with expressions of complete contentment, the girl's gap-toothed smile bright against the sepia tone, the dog's tongue lolling happily. The image, dated May 1931, had been donated to the Vermont Historical Society by an elderly woman clearing her late mother's attic. For months, it sat in the archives, catalogued simply as Unidentified Child with Dog, Depression Era. But when digital restoration specialist James Morrison scanned the photograph at maximum resolution in October 2024, something in the background caught his eye. A detail so small it had been invisible for 93 years. A detail that would unravel a decades-old mystery. The following story is a work of realistic fiction, inspired by true historical events regarding the Great Depression, rural American life in the 1930s, and the power of photographic evidence in solving historical mysteries. James Morrison had been restoring historical photographs for 15 years. He'd seen thousands of images from the Depression era. Families posed stiffly in their Sunday best. Children with hollow cheeks and old eyes. Bread lines stretching down city streets. But something about this particular photograph drew him in. The quality was remarkable for 1931. Someone had used a good camera, probably a Kodak or Graflex, and the exposure was perfect despite the outdoor lighting. The girl wore a faded floral dress, too small, the hem ending well above her knees. Her feet were bare, toes curled on the warm wood of the steps. The dog, some mix of shepherd and retriever, leaned into her with obvious affection. James placed the original print on his scanner bed, set it to 6,400 dpi, and started the digitization process. While the machine hummed, he studied the handwritten note attached to the donation form. Found in Mother's things after she passed. She never talked about her childhood. Don't know who the girl is or where this was taken. Thought maybe someone would want it for historical records. When the scan completed, James opened the file and began his usual process, adjusting contrast, removing dust spots, enhancing faded areas. He zoomed in on the girl's face first. She had light-colored eyes, blue or green, impossible to tell in sepia, and freckles scattered across her nose. A small scar marked her left eyebrow. Her smile was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way Depression-era photos rarely captured. The dog's fur was matted but clean. Someone had cared for this animal despite hard times. Its collar was visible, leather, worn, with what looked like a metal tag hanging from it. James made a mental note to enhance that area later. Then he panned to the background. The steps where they sat belonged to a small house, wooden clapboard siding, painted white but peeling badly. Behind them, a screen door hung slightly open. And beyond that, James froze. In the darkness beyond the screen door, barely visible, was a face. An adult woman's face, pale and thin, watching from inside the house. But that wasn't what made James's breath catch. It was her expression. While the girl in the foreground smiled at the camera, the woman in the shadows looked terrified. James zoomed in further, adjusting the brightness and contrast of just that area. The woman's features resolved with startling clarity. She was young, probably early 20s, with dark circles under her eyes and hollow cheeks that spoke of hunger. Her hand clutched the doorframe, knuckles white with tension. And her eyes, they weren't looking at the camera. They were looking to the left, off frame, at something or someone the photographer couldn't see, or had chosen not to photograph. James sat back in his chair, his heart pounding. He'd seen grief in depression photos before. He'd seen poverty, exhaustion, desperation. But he'd never seen fear like this. Raw, immediate, visceral fear frozen in a moment that was supposed to be about a happy child and her dog. He zoomed out, examining the full image again with new eyes. The girl's smile suddenly seemed different. Not forced exactly, but deliberate. Like she'd been told to smile and was doing her very best to comply. Why? And what was the woman in the shadows so afraid of? James couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. That night, he enlarged the image to poster size and pinned it to his office wall, studying every detail under different lighting conditions. The more he looked, the more wrong things seemed. The girl's position on the steps was slightly awkward, her left shoulder angled forward unnaturally, as if she'd been positioned there and told not to move. The dog's ears were pulled back, not in aggression, but in uncertainty. And the woman's face in the window. Her terror was unmistakable. The next morning, James began investigating the photograph's origin. The donor, Margaret Hastings, had provided minimal information, just that it had been found among her mother's belongings in a house in Rutland, Vermont. Her mother, Elizabeth Hastings, had died at age 92 without ever discussing her childhood. James called Margaret. "I'm trying to identify the people in the photograph," he explained. "Do you know anything about where your mother grew up?" "Not much," Margaret said. "She never talked about her early years. I knew she'd been born in Vermont during the Depression, but that's about it. She always said she didn't remember much before age 10. Did she have any siblings?" A long pause. "Not that I knew of. Why?" "Just trying to piece together family history," James said carefully. He wasn't ready to share what he'd found, not until he understood it better. After the call, James focused on the physical evidence in the photograph. He enhanced the house number visible on a post beside the steps, 247. He examined the street visible in the far background, unpaved, with other small houses lining it. Rural Vermont, probably a mill town or farming community. Then he noticed something else. On the steps beside the girl, barely visible in the original but clear in the enhanced version, was a small suitcase. Old leather, scuffed and worn, with initials burned into the side. E.M. James's pulse quickened. Elizabeth M. Elizabeth something. Could the girl in the photograph be Elizabeth Hastings as a child? He called Margaret back. "What was your mother's maiden name?" "Morrison." "Elizabeth Morrison. Why? Have you found something?" "Morrison. E.M. The girl in the photograph was Elizabeth, Margaret's mother, which meant the woman in the window. "Did your mother have a mother?" James asked carefully. "Your grandmother, do you know anything about her?" "She died when Mom was very young. Some kind of accident, I think. Mom never wanted to talk about it." James thanked Margaret and ended the call. He stood in front of the photograph, his mind racing. A 7-year-old girl with a suitcase. A dog that looked like it was saying goodbye. A woman watching from the shadows with fear in her eyes. And a photographer, whose shadow James now noticed fell across the bottom right corner of the frame, who had captured it all. This wasn't a casual family portrait. This was a moment of transition, of separation, of something ending. But what? And why had the woman in the window been so afraid? James pulled out archival records from Rutland, Vermont, May 1931. He needed to know what had happened in that small town. He needed to understand what this photograph had accidentally documented. The truth was in the newspaper archives. James found it in the Rutland Herald, dated May 15, 1931. Children's Aid Society places 12 local children with farm families. The article was brief, matter of fact. 12 children from Rutland County, ranging in ages from 4 to 10 years, departed yesterday for placement with farm families in upstate New York and Pennsylvania. The Children's Aid Society, working with local authorities, arranged the placements as part of ongoing efforts to provide for children whose families are unable to care for them during these difficult economic times. Orphan trains. James knew the history. Between 1854 and 1929, over 200,000 children had been transported from eastern cities to rural areas, placed with farm families who needed labor. The formal orphan trains had ended in 1929, but the practice of relocating children from struggling families to farm placements continued informally throughout the Depression. Most of the children weren't orphans. They were taken from families who couldn't feed them, families who believed, or were told, that their children would have better lives elsewhere. James searched for more records. In the Rutland County Children's Services archives, now digitized, he found a ledger from May 1931. Among the names, Elizabeth Morrison, age 7, placed with the Thornton family, Seneca County, New York. His hands trembled as he wrote down the information. The girl in the photograph, little Elizabeth Morrison, had been sent away on an orphan train. That's what the suitcase meant. That's why she was posed on the steps with her dog. Someone had been documenting the last moment before she left. But who had taken the photograph? And why had the woman in the window looked so terrified? James dug deeper into the records. He found Elizabeth's mother's name. Sarah Morrison, age 24, widow, unemployed seamstress. The father was listed as deceased, killed in a mill accident in 1929. Then he found something that made his blood run cold. A note attached to Elizabeth's placement file, dated May 14, 1931. Mother protested removal. Claims she can provide for child. Social worker determined home unsuitable. Insufficient food. Inadequate housing. Mother's mental state questionable. Child removed for her own welfare. The woman in the window wasn't afraid of something outside. She was afraid of losing her daughter. And she was watching, helpless, as someone documented the moment before her child was taken away. James looked at the photograph again, with tears in his eyes. That smile on Elizabeth's face, it wasn't happiness. It was courage. A 7-year-old girl clutching her dog, trying to be brave while her world fell apart. And her mother, hidden in the shadows, watching her baby leave, unable to stop it. The photographer's shadow at the edge of the frame suddenly took on new meaning. That wasn't a family member. That was the social worker or an official from the Children's Aid Society, documenting the removal for their records. This photograph wasn't a charming portrait of a Depression-era girl with her dog. It was evidence of forced family separation. It was a mother's nightmare preserved in silver nitrate and paper. It was a child's last moment at home, frozen forever in sepia tones that made tragedy look quaint. And Elizabeth Morrison, now Elizabeth Hastings, had kept this photograph her entire life, never speaking about what it meant. James contacted the Seneca County Historical Society in New York, hoping to trace what happened to Elizabeth after she'd been placed with the Thornton family. What he found instead changed everything. In a box of unclaimed mail from the 1930s, letters that had been returned as undeliverable, was an envelope postmarked Rutland, Vermont, June 1931. Addressed to Elizabeth Morrison, care of Thornton family, rural Route 3, Seneca County, New York. The return address, Sarah Morrison, 247 Maple Street, Rutland, Vermont. The envelope had never been opened. Someone, probably the Thorntons, had refused to accept it and sent it back. The post office had kept it, as they did with all unclaimed mail, until it was eventually archived as historical material. James carefully opened the envelope. Inside, written on thin paper in shaky handwriting, was a letter dated June 3, 1931. My darling Elizabeth, I hope this letter finds you safe and well. I hope the family you are with is kind to you. I hope you have enough to eat and a warm place to sleep. I want you to know that I never wanted you to go. They told me it was the law, that I couldn't take care of you properly because we didn't have enough money. They said you would have a better life on a farm, with people who could feed you and clothe you and send you to school. I tried to stop them. I told them I would find work, any work. I told them we would be fine, but they wouldn't listen. They said my love wasn't enough. They said you needed more than I could give. I held you the night before they came. I memorized your face, your voice, the way you laugh. I wanted to run away with you. But where would we go? We had no money, no family to help us. They would have found us and taken you anyway. When they came that morning, you were so brave. You smiled for the camera like they asked. You hugged Rusty goodbye and didn't cry even though I know you wanted to. You've always been the strongest person I know, even at 7 years old. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry I failed you as a mother. But please know that every single day of your life, I have loved you with everything I am. You are my heart, my soul, my reason for breathing. I will find a way to bring you home. I promise you that. I will work every day, save every penny. I will prove to them that I can take care of you. And when I do, we will never be separated again. Until then, be brave, my darling girl. Remember that you are loved more than you could ever know. Your mother always. Sarah James set the letter down, unable to see through his tears. This wasn't just a historical document. It was a mother's heart, broken and preserved in ink for 93 years. He needed to know what happened next. Did Sarah ever get her daughter back? Did Elizabeth read this letter? Did they ever see each other again? The answers would break his heart. James spent the next 2 weeks tracing both women's lives through historical records, census data, and archived documents. Sarah Morrison's story. After Elizabeth was taken, Sarah worked 3 jobs: cleaning houses, doing laundry, mending clothes, saving every penny to prove she could support her daughter. By August 1931, she had saved enough for rent on a better apartment and had secured steady employment at a textile mill. She wrote to the Children's Aid Society requesting Elizabeth's return. They denied her request, stating that Elizabeth was well adjusted to her new home and that removal would be traumatic for the child. Sarah wrote again and again, each letter more desperate than the last. In November 1931, Sarah took a bus to Seneca County, New York. She found the Thornton farm and knocked on the door. According to court records James discovered, the Thorntons had her arrested for trespassing. A judge ordered her to stay at least 100 miles away from the property or face jail time. Sarah returned to Vermont. She continued working, continued saving, continued fighting. She wrote letters to Elizabeth weekly, letters that were never delivered, returned to sender, or simply destroyed. In March 1932, Sarah collapsed at work from exhaustion and malnutrition. She had been giving away most of her food money to save for legal fees to fight for custody. She died 2 days later in Rutland Hospital. She was 25 years old. The death certificate listed cause of death as pneumonia and general debility. But James knew the truth. Sarah Morrison died of a broken heart. Elizabeth Morrison's story. Elizabeth lived with the Thornton family for 9 years, working on their farm from dawn until dark. She was never legally adopted. She remained a ward of the state, essentially free labor for the Thorntons. The Thorntons never told her about her mother's letters, never mentioned Sarah's visit, never informed her when Sarah died. In 1940, at age 16, Elizabeth left the Thornton farm. She moved to Boston, found work in a factory, and built a new life. She married at 20, had 3 children, and lived to be 92 years old. But according to her daughter Margaret, Elizabeth never spoke about her childhood. She never mentioned the Thorntons. She never talked about the mother she'd been taken from. And she kept one photograph, a little girl with a dog, smiling bravely on the steps of a house in Vermont, captured in the last moment before her world changed forever. The connection. James called Margaret Hastings with what he'd learned. She listened in silence as he read Sarah's letter aloud, as he explained about the orphan train, about Sarah's desperate attempts to reclaim her daughter, about her death in 1932. When he finished, Margaret was crying. "My mother never knew," she whispered. She never knew her mother fought so hard for her. She thought. She always believed she'd been given away because she wasn't wanted. She carried that her entire life. She was wanted, James said quietly. She was loved more than anything in the world. "I wish she'd known that," Margaret said. "I wish she'd read that letter. I wish she'd known the truth." "She does now," James said. And somehow, that seemed important. In December 2024, the Vermont Historical Society held a special exhibition titled Separated: Family, Love, and Loss in Depression-Era America. The centerpiece was the 1931 photograph of Elizabeth Morrison and her dog. Beside it hung an enlarged image highlighting the face in the window, Sarah Morrison, watching her daughter's last moments at home. And beside that, protected in an archival display case, was Sarah's undelivered letter. The exhibition drew hundreds of visitors. Many were descendants of orphan train riders, some meeting for the first time. Others were historians and social workers interested in the darker chapters of child welfare history. But most were ordinary people drawn by the heartbreaking story of a mother and daughter separated by poverty and policy. Margaret Hastings attended the opening. She stood for a long time in front of her mother's childhood photograph, finally understanding the pain Elizabeth had carried in silence for 90 years. "She kept this photo on her dresser my entire childhood," Margaret told James. "I always thought it was because she loved that dog. I never looked closely enough to see the truth." James had one more surprise for her. Through genealogical research, he'd located Elizabeth's dog's fate. Rusty, the shaggy mix captured in the photograph, had died just 3 months after Elizabeth was taken away. Sarah had written about it in one of her undelivered letters. "Rusty stopped eating after you left. I think he was looking for you. He died peacefully in his sleep, and I buried him under the apple tree in the yard. I know you loved him so much. I'm sorry I couldn't save him either." Margaret wept reading those words. "My mother would have wanted to know that," she said. "She would have wanted to know that someone cared, that Rusty had a proper burial, that she'd been missed." The exhibition included information panels explaining the orphan train movement and the Depression-era policies that led to thousands of family separations. It documented how children were often taken from mothers deemed unsuitable based on poverty alone, how love and care were considered insufficient without financial resources to prove it. By the exhibition's close in March 2025, over 5,000 people had visited. The photograph of Elizabeth and Rusty had been featured in national news stories. Descendants of other orphan train children began coming forward with their own family photographs and stories, many discovering for the first time the truth about grandparents or great-grandparents who had been placed out as children. The photograph that had sat anonymous in an archive for months became a catalyst for healing and recognition. It gave voice to thousands of children who'd been taken from their families and to the parents who never stopped loving them. James donated Sarah's letter to the exhibition with Margaret's permission. Before placing it in the display case, he made a copy and gave it to Margaret. "Your mother never got to read this," he said, "but her grandchildren can. Her great-grandchildren can. They can know that their ancestor loved fiercely, fought bravely, and never stopped being a mother, even when everything was taken from her." Margaret clutched the letter to her chest. "Thank you for seeing what no one else saw. Thank you for not looking away." "How could I look away?" James said softly. "A mother's love doesn't disappear just because 93 years have passed. It waits, and it deserves to be witnessed." The 1931 photograph of a girl with her dog looked charming until digital restoration revealed a woman's face in the window, frozen in fear and grief. That detail led researcher James Morrison to uncover the story of Elizabeth Morrison, taken from her mother Sarah during the Depression and placed with a farm family through an orphan train program. Sarah fought desperately to reclaim her daughter and died trying at age 25. Elizabeth never knew her mother's battle until 93 years later, when a letter Sarah wrote, never delivered, was finally discovered. Some photographs don't just capture moments, they preserve love that refused to die.